have some participants online. I hope that you can hear us. Otherwise, you can send a message. So yeah, our topic is here is specific to urban manufacturing. So we are trying to work on what we call urban factories, urban manufacturing. In fact, it's a new, not a new, but it's a this European strategy that is trying to enhance this type of manufacturing because of the mass production, the pressure on resources, the competition, etc. We have some all the innovative and industrial activities have been pushed away from city centers and urban and urban centers. So Europe is now trying to enhance more local, circular, and small factories that are mainly how to say used by creatives, artists. So we are focusing here to enhance and to reinforce the production capabilities of small entrepreneurs, creatives, and artists. So we work on the urban factory. This is workshops, shared workshops like maker spaces, fab labs, etc., or tiers-lieux in France. In France, we call it also tiers-lieux. And it is integrated in a European project which is called Lots Factories. So we will having 5 presentations that are trying to develop frameworks and tools and new approaches to define the loads model that is contributing to urban manufacturing. I will not give a lot of detail. I will let our presenters present their results. We will start with Fouad Sayoun, that is ready. And that he will present the work on supporting collaboration and co-creation in the Lots Factories environment. I will.
So, hello everyone. I will start by once upon a time, but not too long ago. A designer named Nicola had an idea or a proof of concept, and he wanted to industrialize it. But he didn't have the means, the tools, or even the skills to do that. And one day on his way home, he noticed like a space at the corner of the street where people were walking, working, buzzing with machines, etc. So he got curious and wanted to enter. And there he met the robotics engineer with the maker, the artisan, which were working on a prototype for a local medical device. And I told you that story just to say that when people with different backgrounds come together, we have collaboration that emerged, and it is becoming one of the engines of innovation in our cities today. And okay, so and after that, however, since collaboration is made natural most of the times, we don't know how effective or mature it is. And that's where our paper will come in place, a collaborative capacity maturity model to support these teams in the emerging industrial ecosystem. I am Fouad Sayoun, and I am a mechanical and industrial engineer doing research at Grenoble ELP. And today I will be presenting our results to you. So starting by the introduction, okay. So after decades of deindustrialization, recent studies have shown that there is a renewed interest in small-scale urban manufacturing. And at the heart of this resurgence, we see the maker movement as a new industrial revolution democratizing innovation. It is mainly characterized by 3 characteristics. The first one is the accessibility of open source software. The second characteristic is the adoption of digital and rapid prototyping technologies, such as 3D printers, CNC machines. And the last characteristic is a cultural norm to share knowledge, making the communities more than just consumers or users. Now, maker spaces and Fab Labs are acting as catalysts for this movement, providing shared spaces where people work around project-based activities. They are now highlighting a new, smaller, and more flexible model of urban manufacturing, where diverse stakeholders come together. They use the digital technologies, foster social connection in order to create value. In the research context. So this new kind of industrialization has emerged new initiatives. One of these initiatives is the LODES Factory, LODES standing for Local Accessible Urban Digital and Sustainable Factories, where this project aimed to industrialize these maker spaces, helping them to scale up by providing them methodologies and tools in order to create some urban fabrication hubs to produce customized product in small cities. And this initiative is now like promoting a new approach to more open, distributed, and locally embedded industrial ecosystems, where success depends highly on collaboration, as I've talked in my introduction, and we can call it even a collaboration-oriented industrialization. Many scholars have highlighted the importance of collaboration. If I can just summarize them up by just some ideas. The first one, it helps to make better decisions. Then it generates creative and innovative solutions, promoting skill development and also knowledge sharing, and at the end, ultimately improving the overall productivity. However, when reviewing the literature, we have found some absence of an adapted collaboration model for our case. The first gap is that many maker initiatives still lack structure for scaling up. From the other part, we have some traditional collaboration model, but most of them mainly deal with centralized or large-scale industries. And from another part, when we have a diversity of heterogeneous stakeholders, some unresolved tensions and unclear governance dilemma will appear, and also, of course, causing misalignment and some cooperation challenges. The maturity model. So in order to assess and evaluate this collaboration, we have used the maturity model approach, which they provide a framework for structured capability development by identifying key attributes for a particular area of interest. In our case, it is collaboration, and guiding progress toward the desired final state. It is composed mainly of dimensions, each representing specific capabilities, and these dimensions are assessed through a multiple level stages. However, after closely examining the maturity models, we can see that collaboration-specific models are relatively rare compared to the wide use of these tools in other domains, such as software engineering, for example. And that's where we will work to in our capacity building model. But before digging into the model, just a quick definition of what is collaboration maturity for us. It is the ability of diverse stakeholders to collaborate together across a set of interrelated fields. So the scope of our model will be mainly the application inside local, urban, open, and distributed manufacturing ecosystem. The purpose of our model is to create a framework for assessing and evaluating collaboration. And it was mainly, the design phase was guided by two lenses, if I can say. First one is the literature review, and the second is some observations from projects distributed in 3 maker spaces within the LODES initiatives that were mainly in France, Germany, and Denmark. So the overall structure of the C2M2 model. Our approach to our collaboration capacity maturity model, we followed a multidimensional perspective in order to capture all the aspects related to collaboration. And we have grouped them into 5 distinct dimensions, but interrelated. The first one is the collaboration dynamics, which deals with the interpersonal aspect. So it's how people mainly interact, how are their behaviors, especially since people are a very important cornerstone for maker spaces, and having strong dynamics will encourage their engagement. The second dimension is the structure and governance, dealing with the organizational aspects, especially that effective governance is essential to reach collaborative goals inside complex ecosystems, such as in maker spaces, and also in order to deal with some barriers due to geographical distance or some unresolved tensions. The third dimension is workflow and operation, since we know that collaboration is not just about people or tools, it's about also how work is coordinated and operations are managed. So this dimension will deal with the logistical and practical aspects of collaboration. The fourth dimension is the information and knowledge management, since we saw in the beginning that it is one of the core characteristics of the maker movement, and it deals with the informational aspects, since having a good management of information will help the systematic learning, review the project advancements, reduce redundancies, and of course, improving the overall productivity. The last dimension is the collaboration support, dealing with the technological aspects. So, okay, now we have the other 4 dimensions, but if we don't have enablers or available tools and adequate competencies, we cannot make the best of our efforts. So now each of these dimensions was further composed into subcategories. If I will start with the collaboration dynamics, the first subcategory is trust and awareness, dealing with the degree of confidence between stakeholders. The collaboration scope, dealing with the shared objective of their teamwork, and the degree of commitment between the different team members. The structure and governance is also composed into first communication and how frequent is their interactions. The formalization of relationship here, if they have agreed on a way for their arrangement or documenting their roles. The decision-making process, how it will be done inside their collaboration. The leadership support, and last but not least is the physical distance. How can they overcome the barrier of geographical separation? The first subcategory of workflow and operation is the resources management, how resources are allocated and shared between the diverse collaborators. Then the risk assessment in order to not disrupt collaboration. The conflict management, when tensions arise, how this will be handled inside the group. And it's work coordination, which mainly deals with the sequencing and coordination of tasks. The last 2 categories now, information and knowledge management has the information organization, dealing with the collection, structuring, and access of information. And of course, knowledge sharing, the reuse and dissemination of knowledge. Collaboration support, we have the techniques and technologies such as the project management tools, communication networks, and the training and competency development in order to make the best use of tools and to work accordingly. The implication, we have made some implications from our model. The first thing is that it raises awareness of collaboration dimensions, especially that some factors are often overlooked and they can have a great influence on the quality of collaboration. It provides a framework to assess and improve collaboration by assessing the readiness across the multiple categories. And it facilitates stakeholder engagement by fostering strong relationships and a shared sense of commitment. There is also some theoretical implication advancing the understanding of collaboration maturity, especially in the context of maker spaces, and supporting the research for future direction of multi-stakeholder collaboration. Atlas future direction, like we plan to refine and validate our model through a series of workshops and interviews with maker spaces, and to develop a self-assessment tool in order to translate our model into a measurable dimension. This self-assessment tool will be mainly a website where we can, there is a series of questions and we can assess collaboration according to it. Also, it will be accompanied by some training sessions on how to use the tool, and at the end, providing recommendation based on the assessment. And that was all.
Thank you. Thank you, Brad, for the presentation. Do you have any questions, comments, or? Yes, Manu?
Question for you. The self-assessment you were just mentioning. Who's supposed to be the user of that?
It will be the people involved in a similar project inside the makerspace. So they will assess their degree of collaboration inside this makerspace.
So it would be a user of the makerspace, not necessarily the makerspace.
No, not solely the makerspace. It will be also involve the users that have, or the project holders, I can say, that are working inside the makerspace.
And what would the assessment, give me as an output? Like kind of to what extent I am collaborative, or to what extent I need the models,
Okay, yeah. When we had the thought of an assessment, like we didn't want to go into measuring, but not to provide a grade or a measure, but rather provide a guidance, like through a series of questions into the subcategories. Let's take, for example, a subcategory in the information and knowledge management. So we ask some questions and you answer this question, and based on your answer, we can relate your degree of maturity according to some levels. And let's say the weak levels, we can provide you some recommendation. For example, use a better tool for accessing information, or this kind of recommendation just to improve your practices. So I hope it's clear.
Yeah, because if you see that, I think it's a very powerful and comprehensive model on a very high level, right? But if you go deeper, then the self-assessment would be very different from if you say you have a maker who is probably not interested in, operational support because he knows the machines he uses and has access to them, right? But from the perspective of a owner of makerspace who offers that service, he would have the whole bunch of aspects he should provide. And then there would be a third party, maybe a creative person or even a company that wants to engage with, right? They probably are not interested in that kind of maturity. However, they would have to know how they can, interact, right?
Yep.
So the makerspace owner would have to know interpersonal, can I make trust? How can I, inspire companies to open up in that setting for projects, etc. So the question is then, when you talk about self-assessment, right, for what kind of user is it giving you a response on depending on what role or hat you are wearing?
Yeah, for us, it is mainly for like project holder, but I got this remark from makerspaces. They weren't very interested at the beginning, but because I think we are still underestimating the impact that collaboration has, inside this kind of local, open and distributed manufacturing. And I think the main purpose is like to provide a framework to help them improve their outcome, let's say. So
yeah, but I think the helping is fine, right? This is what we all want with all that we do. But I think understanding from a scientific point of view is also very important as a first step, right? So having what you here have as a very, very sound, comprehensive framework, Understanding exactly how that works with all its categories is the first step. Where the next step, you could nail down it to specific use cases, uses, etc., and then provide support, right? But understanding, I think, is the first important step.
Yeah, maybe to compare the questions and comments from Manuel. Here we are the maybe the more operational level inside a makerspace.
Yeah.
And you say or you talk about urban manufacturing and urban distributed manufacturing. So the other big challenge is how this kind of equipment and infrastructure are able to collaborate outside.
Yeah.
So one good question or interesting question could be, are we able to improve collaborations outside the manufacturer, the micro manufacturer, the maker space, if the collaborations inside the maker space is better? I think that could be also an interesting study to do.
Okay, so yeah,
We don't need question answer now.
yeah,
But I think it's again, why do you need to evaluate internal collaborations in the makerspace? Is if it's only to have a better atmosphere, okay, it's nice. But in the perspective of urban manufacturing, the objective is how are you able to collaborate with policymakers, with companies, with suppliers, etc., etc. And I don't know if someone, if a makerspace has a good internal collaborations, if that support an outside collaboration.
like till now we didn't very much pay attention to.
Yeah, I know, no, that's
outside.
just to open the.
Yeah, no, I done it.
Okay. Thank you, Fred. Maybe
Thank-
we'll go to the next presentation.
Thank you, everyone. So this presentation is strongly connected with the previous one, and every presentation somehow falls under the same overall project. But maybe it makes sense to point out what is the connection with sustainability and with circularity. There are different ways, of course, to create a sustainable ecosystems. When we work on small manufacturing on the local scale, on the urban production, we cannot scale the impact by scaling the micro factory, the urban factory producing it. We have to scale the impact replicating the model. So one key aspect is how can we convince more people to produce in a different way, even on a small scale, even locally, even on the urban scale. And to facilitate this, we have to figure out what kind of support people need to start this kind of production. This is a key point in what we are exploring. And we collect quantitative data about a production, while it's very difficult to share or to collect qualitative data. And that's mainly because it's a kind of knowledge that you somehow absorb while you do something. You don't even realize that you're doing that. And at a certain point, it becomes the natural way of doing things. But if someone asks you, how do you do that? Or how do you make your production more local, urban, digital, sustainable, and accessible, you struggle to explain how. So this is the key point we started from. See if I can use this. Whoa. So the project, the research is within the framework or the project of LOUDS. LOUDS again is an acronym for local, accessible, urban, digital, and sustainable. That are 5 pillars of what we think the manufacturing in Europe should be. And of course, it's strongly to fabless and maker spaces as small areas where we actually produce things. So it's easy in this context to measure some data, such as how long you use a machine, how much energy you consume to produce something, how much material you consume to produce something. It's harder to evaluate other aspects. For instance, which one is the best business model to valorize something you have, or how other people producing similar things in another country in Europe that you don't know actually manage to do it. So this was the part that was hard for us to figure out. Now I have to remember the direction. So based on that, we tried to figure out a way to collect these informations and to share these informations. And of course, this was with the objective of scaling up the impact by replicating the model. As I said before, this project is the testing ground of this experiment and this research started in 2022, and it will go on until 2026. And the approach that we explored is a blueprint to collect this kind of informations. Now, the blueprint is a template that we used to collect information from small manufacturers that were involved in the project through open calls. And it's divided into 3 categories. So there are 3 main areas. One that is about the project, one that is about the production, and one that is a sort of transversal layer where we sort of summarize every aspect connected to knowledge exchange and business models that happens across the core dimensions. It will be easier to understand when we see it. So this is basically the blueprint. And the idea is that you can describe more or less your project. It's also something that should be valuable for the small manufacturer using it. And the idea is to make it valuable as a way to keep track of how the project is evolving. Project means any production that respects the LOUDS principles. So on a small scale, local, urban, accessible, digital, and sustainable. So if this is a sort of general description of what the project is, this is a concentric analysis starting from the core product that you're doing. It could be a product, it could be a service, of course. So whatever you're trying to produce, how you're gonna produce it, so the process to produce it, partners and collaborations. It's impossible to create a local production without having a network. So it's fundamental to understand how to valorize and create these kind of partnerships, and in the end, users and consumers. So people that are interacting with the product because they buy it, they use it. Some people use it with them, and so on. And as you can see at the bottom of it, there are like 2 layers that are not tied to a specific step in the development or a specific circle in the development. It's transversal because I could figure out something useful in the development, in the core product analysis, for instance, that could be a good point for a business model. Partnership should be an asset for sharing knowledge. So it's not that business models comes at the end or knowledge sharing comes at the end. It's something that can be connected in different point of the development. So the first part, as I said, it's description of the project, what's the objective, and the timeline is a way to keep track of what's going on. I will go fast on this. The second part, the core product, what you're making, the implementation, how you're making it, who makes it possible. In here, there's private-public collaborations, there's the sustainable material suppliers, there are the co-designers, people that help you to figure out what you want to do. And in the end, you have users and customers. The last section that might be, in my opinion, one of the most interesting is how do you share knowledge and how do you implement economical sustainability? And again, we will see it in a second. Each information you add in this template could lead to some knowledge you want to share, or some knowledge that you need, or potential economical income. So these are some examples of blueprints done by partners of the projects, actually winners of open calls that we did. We have 4 at the moment. All these cards are actually pieces of knowledge that they shared with us. Now, we started from an assumption that the most interesting kind of information you get them from informal conversations. So we tried to extract the basic knowledge through interviews. And in here, you see that there are symmetrical shapes. One is an issue and the other one is a solution. Sometimes there's an issue without a solution. Sometimes there's a solution without the issue because you figured out something before having a problem. But it's a good way to say, like, okay, I had these problems that leads me to that kind of solution. And I got that information, for instance, from knowledge shared by someone else. Again, it's a way to try to collect in a synthetic way all the qualitative knowledge that you develop along the process of creating a product or a service, and organize it in a way in which it's more flexible than creating a full documentation. So, of course, in an ideal world, every small manufacturer, every Louds factory, every makerspace would document open source everything. And this will create a huge collection of knowledge where everybody can dig in and nobody will abuse this open source knowledge. We know it's not the real case scenario. So we had to figure out ways to allow people to share what they understood, what they learned, without forcing them to reveal what they are not comfortable to reveal. And this is also connected to the business models. So many people feel like they have to keep some pieces of knowledge for themselves. It's not necessarily true that they have to, but it makes them more comfortable to share everything else. And there's a lot of knowledge in what they're willing to share. So often, if the decision is share everything or share nothing, people choose to share nothing. So you see different structures, but what is interesting to me is that you can see from some pieces of knowledge, for instance, to get to some solutions that goes back to other pieces of knowledge, or that they have an impact on a potential business model that generates an economical benefit. Now, why we tried to do this? We tried to do this to analyze experiences and share experiences in a different way from what's done normally, to try to get closer to the natural way people share knowledge when they talk to each other somehow. So less formal, but with scientific approach and rigor, and with the objective of figuring out what are the skills missing and what are the information missing. From that, we realized that 7 different areas could be impacted by the knowledge shared, or people could benefit from knowledge in these 7 different areas. And we are building actually a Louds Academy that is not a program that we thought is what people needs to know, but it's somehow the consequence of what people were saying they were struggling with. So there are limitations in the process, of course, we are aware of that. At the moment, the sample is very limited, so it's just a first approach. It's a very specific group, so all the things that you struggle with sometimes with research, but it seems promising as a way to explore alternatives, to share knowledge and collect knowledge. So what we realize in the process is that there are gaps in collecting knowledge, let's say, if not data, because data sometimes sounds very numeric or just that. And this is fundamental to scale up by replication the impact that the urban manufacturing could have. We think that this approach is easier for people to engage with, and it didn't take too long for people to fill it in with interesting informations. And we think that filling the gaps in knowledge might help people to be more proactive or have a higher impact in the way they produce things. Sorry, this wasn't meant to be there. So this is basically the structure of the research, and the blueprint is available. We will share what we learned, of course, and the academy, the Louds Academy, will be available hopefully soon online again for everybody to follow and learn from that. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Enrico, for the presentation. Maybe we will take some questions. Manuel?
I have a remark and a question. I don't know if we conceptually already thought of that, but there was the concept of stick information in innovation related context coined by some people in the 90s. And stick information was exactly what you were describing, right? Qualitative thing that you could not get on or express, it was in the people's mind. We might look into that concept, but that helps us.
Very interesting.
Anyway, the second thing is when you talk about blueprint and you had the teams filling up the gap, right? Looking at all those blueprints, did you see any kind of patterns that are similar to all of them? Or is that something like, let's say, a user journey on the blueprint where you say, okay, usually go that way and then that and that? Did you see any kind of patterns on the pattern?
So only 4. It's difficult to extrapolate a pattern. And we did it in a way that wasn't chronological. It was meant to be non-chronological. So when we ran the interview, the approach was, okay, tell us about your project. How did you describe it in 2 sentences? What is the object you produce? How do you make it? Who helps you to do that? Who are you interacting with, selling it or sharing it with? So it was a way to analyze different things in different moments, but without creating a continuity, because the point is not, we thought this was feasible and then we realized it didn't work. That's development. It's kind of normal. The point was, we got in that direction because everybody's speaking about it. But then when we spoke with the researcher, we realized that those things were not scalable. So, and then the point becomes buzzwords could be counterproductive because simplifying too much knowledge, then people start in a direction that is known to not be scalable. So it was really about extrapolating, let's say, where people get stuck in developing things by themselves. How do they approach the problem, where they find informations, and what they get out of it. And this is, again, a sort of patchwork and is not a timeline by design. But I'm very curious about what you were mentioning before.
I would add to this quickly, because you used it for information gathering. And I'm wondering if you can see from the few times that you've used it so far, I mean, it's not a large center yet, you said, but if it could also somehow turn into something that can deliver findings towards making it into a design tool for creating a process, for envisioning a process.
I didn't think about it. It would be interesting to explore it. But yeah, we stayed on purpose away from processes, so I didn't think about it. It would be nice to explore.
I think it can evolve like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's in the way of how to maybe further use it, and maybe quite naturally that would happen. Looks a bit like the business model generator, where they started off with basic research, right? And then in the end turned out to be a very useful tool where, depending on which industry you are, you would focus, for example, much more on the supply chain side, partner side, not so much on the on the consumer or customer side. But depending on what project you are, there are different pieces that are much more important. However, they have the overall picture, and then you have to somehow obviously work with each other. Right? So, but I think something generic like a business model generator is much too generic to be used in such a case.
Yeah.
Right? So it could be very interesting whether it kind of naturally would evolve in such a level.
That's an interesting point, also because at a certain point, I guess, with the larger samples, we could try to associate the project with which area is more relevant, and eventually with the strategies that works well in that topic.
Yeah.
And at that point, from collection of dots, you finally get a picture. That would be the most interesting approach.
Maybe could you go back to the slides, 15 or something like that? So the case student you have on this. If I understand well, in fact, it's very interesting because you can see the links between the different parts. In fact, for me, it's not really iterative. Sometimes you have now from the user customer to the previous stage, but you don't have feedback according to what I see between knowledge or business to the first part. So that would be interesting to try to identify if there are loops between the different parts, and how finally the output focusing on business or knowledge can also improve the process of productions. And also maybe, I don't know if it's relevant, but with the Living Lab point of view, so the user-driven innovations approach, or the end user can also be involved or linked to the productions to have a real local and distributed pattern. For me, it's very useful and very interesting because that open a lot of questions. With this kind of open question.
Yeah, we can take some extra time and not now.
Yeah, sure.
No worries. To actually check what people wrote down and see, because we didn't force people to follow a specific pattern. That's why, in some cases you have also dot arrows. In other cases, you don't. Like, okay, this was very, very minimal, let's say so. But you see that there are different approach to how people actually fit it in. In this case, they added two parts only. It's not connected with the previous, so it would be interesting to dig in. But we kept it very or as minimal as possible because we thought that people don't share things because they don't see the value of that. And if it takes a lot of effort to share information, so to document information, they do it even less. While if they have a value in like thinking and reflecting, then it kind of makes sense for them to take notes even while they go and saying, okay, I got stuck on this, and this was a production problem, or this was a supplier problem, or this was I didn't have the right partners, so I couldn't occupy public space even temporarily because the municipality didn't allow me to. So when you see the obstacles in what you do and how you solved it, that was the kind of knowledge we wanted to share. And again, in the easier possible way, so it didn't impact people.
I have one question about the scale of analysis. As I understand, I can see projects, and is it the factory or the project within the factory?
It's the project.
The project, so it's maker, artist, what is?
Yeah, I mean, these are actually the open call winners
Yes.
that deliver things already. And they described what they do while they were developing the solutions that they were working on.
Yes,
The key point is that even if it's the factory, it's the space that it's allowed factory. So it's the space that implements the value. You materialize those values into the products. So not every product allowed factory produce is local, urban, sustainable, digital, accessible. It might be that some products are strong in the urban accessible aspects and others are stronger in sustainable and local. So you analyze the single projects.
exactly. Okay.
I guess it's late, but if I can ask a question to the people that are not familiar with the projects. So in particular, the group over there. Just because while I was speaking, I was expecting most of the people to just take a nap. And I noticed that you were like paying attention and wondering what I was talking about. So I'd be curious, even if you don't have all the elements, of course, of the people working on the projects, what do you think? Or what is your background, or what is your contribution on that?
Yeah, I was wondering if, sorry, if it's relevant to use actor network theory to analyze your actor network theory, Latour on Kanu. Maybe you know them?
You're speaking with the designer, you have to.
Yeah, no, to analyze the process. Because it's more singular and it's more, I think it's just to formalize it.
Okay.
It will be maybe more easy to understand. No?
Let's try if you want. You can, if you want to stay later, like 5 minutes, you should.
Yeah, but
you
I
have
will tell you
mine.
something tomorrow about it. It's not easy to use, but at the end, your analyze are maybe more relevant.
Okay,
I don't know, it's a suggestion.
thanks for the feedback. Yeah. Anyone else? Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hello everyone, I'm Umberto Urbano, and I'm going to present a scaling up urban manufacturing definition and perspective. And I'm going to do it in French because I think it's going to be easier for me to explain it. And in any case, the presentation is in English. Et du coup, je passe au français. Et dans cet aspect, je vais parler de faire passer à l'échelle la fabrication urbaine, définition et perspective. Cette recherche a été réalisée dans le cadre de mon stage de fin de master avec l'Université de Lorraine, plus précisément, et le laboratoire FP, en collaboration avec l'association LOCA 3, dans le cadre du projet européen Lot Factories. Et pour situer les contextes, les villes ces dernières années elles ont évolué profondément et surtout ils sont passés de plus que des villes de consommation à des villes de production aussi. C'est-à-dire ce sont des véritables écosystèmes vivants où les organisations, les communautés et les individus collaborent pour faire circuler des connaissances scientifiques, et industrielles et symboliques. Et c'est ce qu'on appelle les territoires créatifs aussi. Et pour répondre à cette notion, Simon, en 2009, a introduit le concept de middle ground qui justement présente la connexion entre les deux espaces. Les underground, c'est la communauté créative et informelle, avec les upperground, c'est les institutions, les compagnies. Et normalement, on les trouve sur la présentation, sur la forme des tiers-lieux, aussi des espaces de coworking, des Fab Labs. Et pourquoi l'urban manufacturing dans ces contextes? Parce que justement, ces dernières années, la recherche s'est concentrée sur les aspects sociaux et culturels, mais il y a une dimension productive qui reste encore pour explorer. La fabrication urbaine représente la relocalisation de la production dans les villes d'une forme plus souple et plus durable, soit à travers de la fabrication digitale, numérique, des micro-factories urbaines. Et c'est justement ce type de production qui reconnecte les espaces, les personnes et même leur identité, et aussi créer de nouvelles formes de collaboration. Et lié à la fabrication urbaine, il y a un défi qu'on trouve, c'est le scale-up. Parce que la plupart de ce type d'initiatives restent locales, fragmentées et parfois fragiles. C'est pour ça que cet aspect a été intéressant à développer pendant cet stage, justement de comment structurer cette initiative, les connecter et les consolider. Et justement, en lien avec toutes ces questions, on a une question qu'on dit clé, c'est comment cette initiative de fabrication urbaine peut continuer à se développer sans perdre leur ancrage et leur flexibilité, et comment les contextes de le scale-up peuvent être interprétés dans les contextes de l'urban manufacturing. Mais il faut aussi se poser la question, quelle est la place de cette dimension créative dans les middle ground? Et dans cet ordre d'idée, cette recherche a eu pour but un double objectif. Dans un premier temps, d'établir un état de l'art en rapport à ces notions, et en deuxième temps, de proposer un cadre méthodologique justement pour accompagner ce type d'initiatives. Et c'est de cette façon qu'on arrive à la première partie de cet objectif, que c'était l'état de l'art, qu'on appelait le scale-up dans le urban manufacturing. On a utilisé plusieurs mots-clés et la méthodologie a été assez simple. C'était une analyse bibliographique à travers des Web of Science et des reviewers avec des périodes de langue établies, et on a collecté en total 3720 articles qui ont défini un peu les caractères ou la nature polysémique justement des termes de scale-up. Ça peut représenter une croissance assez rapide, soit parce qu'on ajoute des employés, on augmente les ventes soit parce qu'on incrémente la production, les volumes. Et en pharmaceutique, c'est fait à travers les quality bed design ou c'est des étapes plus complexes qui requièrent la capacitation ou l'apprentissage des nouvelles choses. C'est ce qu'on peut retenir de cette partie, c'est que justement la recherche ces dernières 5 années a augmenté et justement la plupart des défis, c'est qu'il n'y a pas de cadre méthodologique et la plupart des cas restent sur les essais-erreurs, ce qui pose problème justement pour continuer à développer ce type d'activité. Et cette approche, c'est basé justement sur une approche du Living Lab dans un interview qui s'appelle l'Octroi Nancy, localisé dans les secteurs, dans les quartiers Rive de Meurthe à Nancy, en France. Et c'est un site, on va dire, qui compile environ 4800 mètres carrés et parmi les 100 bâtiments, dont la plupart accueillent des porteurs de projets et des activités liées à la fabrication urbaine. Cette partie-là, c'est pour vous expliquer un peu la démarche qu'on a appelée une démarche diagnostique en continu et qui repose sur les 7 principales parties et selon lesquelles la recherche a été faite. On a déjà vu la première partie et on va continuer à développer les 6 dernières. Ici, on passe à la deuxième partie, qui c'était les codages et l'appropriation méthodologique. Justement, cette partie, elle était basée dans les Technical and Organizational Readiness Framework. C'est un travail qui a été fait justement pour l'équipe de Smart Factories. Et il a servi comme un socle base pour la suite de la recherche, de s'approprier justement toutes les notions liées à l'urban manufacturing et aussi pour les repérer les critères qu'on devait aller chercher un peu plus tard. La troisième partie, c'était une analyse des travaux existants, justement, parce que l'Octroi Nancy, c'est un lieu en pleine transformation. C'est là que c'est pas les premières études qui ont été faites sur le site. C'est-à-dire, il y a eu des travaux précédents. C'est pour ça qu'on a trouvé pertinent d'établir et de compiler tous ces travaux pour identifier ce qu'il manquait, où il y avait des opportunités, et pour rester cohérente avec les contextes. Grâce à tout ce travail, on passe justement de toutes ces notions qu'on a repérées à construire un outil clair. On a développé un questionnaire divisé en 5 thématiques qui regroupe à peu près la globalité des aspects liés à la fabrication urbaine. Et plutôt qu'un support, en même temps qu'il a servi comme un outil pour enquêter sur ces aspects, il a servi comme un outil de dialogue. Et un peu plus tard, on va voir comment cette organisation nous a servi pour mieux comprendre ce qui se développe sur le site de l'Octroi Nancy. L'étape suivante, c'était les entretiens. Normalement, les entretiens ils sont constitués en 5 parties, en préparation des bases, justement, comme il y avait des travaux précédents. Et ces travaux nous ont servi à pré-remplir les questionnaires pour gagner du temps, pour montrer aussi un peu l'importance de ces travaux précédents. Et en total, les entretiens ils se sont développés pendant 3 semaines avec une duration approximative entre 45 et 60 minutes. Et on a eu 14 répondants. Et pour les entretiens, plutôt qu'un entretien face à face, on a voulu développer une attitude plus proche pour améliorer la co-construction, justement. Et on s'est mis côté à côté, justement, pour poser des questions. Et en plus de tous ces questionnaires, on a pris des photos, on a pris des notes, il y a des commentaires qui parfois n'étaient pas présents dans les questionnaires, mais qui se sont révélés utiles à la fin de cette démarche. Et ensuite, on a passé à faire une synthèse et analyse des résultats. Et ces résultats ils sont présentés avec un rapport et une présentation visuelle. on a organisé justement, grâce au questionnaire, elle nous a permis d'organiser justement les résultats par thématique. Et par exemple, les questions fermées, elles se sont traduites en graphique, les questions ouvertes en histogramme et des réponses plutôt qualitatives dans des commentaires dans les documents. Et tout ce travail nous a permis justement d'identifier les besoins, les potentialités du lieu. Et cette dernière partie, elle est venue complémenter toute la démarche, même si cette partie elle a été développée depuis le début. Elle a été finalisée justement après les 6 dernières étapes, parce que c'est à ce moment-là qu'on s'est posé la question de pourquoi pas retrouver les repères ou les points en commun entre les références. Pour cela, on a utilisé cette initiative, 4 Européens et 3 Françaises. Et c'est ce qu'on a pu identifier, c'est des logiques partagées comme accès et inclusion, les espaces, les machines et les équipements, l'organisation et les services, la communauté, l'ancrage territorial et les valeurs et visions. Et à la fin de toute cette démarche, c'est ce qu'on a pu obtenir, c'est des premiers résultats plutôt liés à les modalités du passage à l'échelle. Et c'est grâce à tout ce travail qu'on a pu identifier que le passage à l'échelle, il peut se faire de façon individuelle, soit à travers de l'évolution de l'espace, c'est-à-dire à travers des nouveaux espaces, de l'ajout des équipements, une nouvelle organisation, et augmenter la production et volume, mais c'est aussi possible à travers l'extension d'un nouvel espace hors les murs du site. Et normalement, c'est ce qu'on a vu, c'est que ça impacte directement sur une échelle, on va dire, locale, et justement lié au passage à l'échelle individuelle, on a identifié différents leviers, comme les espaces physiques, les machines, les aspects liés à l'innovation, et dans un deuxième temps, on a les passages à l'échelle collective, que normalement, ça va être en lien avec la coopération entre les villes et avec la mutualisation des ressources, et aussi à travers la création de filières spécialisées. Et on peut penser les passages à l'échelle collective comme une façon de passer à l'échelle individuellement. Et pour les échelles de rayonnement, on a identifié 4 catégories principales et je vais vous expliquer tout de suite. Je pense que ces graphiques-là résument plus facilement. C'est ce que j'ai voulu montrer avec les modalités. Justement, ici, on a une structure qu'on peut faire passer à l'échelle. Elle peut passer à l'échelle, soit individuellement, ou soit individuellement dans les mêmes lieux, ou soit individuellement avec l'ajout d'un nouveau espace, ou soit collectivement à travers la mutualisation, la collaboration des différents lieux. Et c'est dans cet ordre d'idée qu'il peut attendre les différentes échelles, soit locales, soit métropolitaines, soit régionales ou nationales, ou même européennes. Qu'est-ce qu'à la fin on peut voir, c'est que chaque passage à l'échelle, c'est une trajectoire spécifique au contexte, et ça va dépendre des besoins, des ressources, de l'identité, et la fabrication urbaine continue à croître. Mais elle a besoin des méthodes structurées justement pour les passages à l'échelle. On peut dire que les passages à l'échelle, c'est pas seulement une expansion physique, mais c'est aussi une organisation, c'est des ressources. On peut dire que c'est justement dans les middle ground où tous ces aspects se rejoignent et il n'y a pas un modèle spécifique. Et en même temps, on peut penser les passages à l'échelle, contrairement à ce qu'on avait pensé avant, que c'était un processus rapide. On peut penser au passage à l'échelle comme quelque chose de plus lent, plus souple. C'est pour ça qu'il y a une notion qui vient faire partie de la discussion, c'est le slow manufacturing. Enfin, les cas d'octroi nous ont montré que les passages à l'échelle dans la fabrication urbaine ne peut pas être compris sans comprendre les dynamiques de middle Et c'est justement sur cette approche qu'on pense qu'on peut aider à développer ces initiatives. Plutôt, on peut se dire que ça va être plutôt des travaux situés, mais qui vont rester transférables. C'est-à-dire qu'on ne peut pas faire copier-coller d'un site à l'autre. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Roberto, pour cette présentation claire. Thank you. We have some questions en français ou en anglais?
I'll go first. I saw your list of keywords for the state-of-the-art research. I wonder if you took into account or were able to kind of demystify the synonymous use of aspects like manufacturing, production, and fabrication. I think it's even a cultural or language issue. Even inside Germany, it's used differently. International English, I think it's used differently. Did you find somewhere a study which says or clearly defines what is what and what is? That's it. Because manufacturing, for example, in the German context, right, it's very, very craft work, right? There's not much digital tools, etc. Whereas production usually is more industrial content, right? And then there is fabrication, which has also some kind of roots in making physical stuff, right? So I'm wondering, when it comes to literature, right, as for example, the Fab Lab, the Fab City movement, etc., is talking about fabrication, whether you find any common ground on stating we use manufacturing because of this and that aspect, and not the others, or we take it into account because most of the studies go into a similar direction.
Yes, that's interesting because when I made the state of art, I utilized the production like a keyword, but it was many results, and it was complicated to understand the scale up. That's why I utilized the manufacturing instead production.
Yeah, just to say, because our institute takes a clear stance on this, okay? Because it's we do factory management. So when it comes to the logistics and everything in the factory and around the factory, then we talk of production. In German context, when we talk about, and I think this is really different in European context as well, so it's very interesting. When we talk about manufacturing, we talk about the shop floor, everything that happens, machining and so on. Also digital manufacturing, machining is manufacturing, yeah. But then if you look at the information economics, yeah, if you look at the MES systems and all of that, again, you're talking maybe also still about manufacturing, so the boundaries are not so clear. The third thing, you asked about fabrication. So fabrication would be more like a term about doing the manufacturing in different environments, because manufacturing in our environment is considered industrial. Whereas fabrication in a makerspace, for example, would be the better term because it's not really industrialized per se. That would be how we would distinct this. Because, okay, yeah, it's our institute is for machine tools and fabrication management.
I mean, I clearly see that point.
Yeah, but you feel it differently, by the way.
But the question is whether, for example, also literature, different strands of literature in global context go different that way, right?
Yeah, no, even the EU goes differently. So manufacturing is in the EU what we would call production. Very confusing. Yes, I don't know in France. Sorry.
J'avais une question sur votre proposition, I can speak in English, you use a middle ground approach to explain the scale up of the project, and I wonder Could you come back to why did you choose this approach? It's an interesting one, I think, but I was also thinking about a multi-level perspective that could be also a way to understand how to go from niches to the diffusion of the larger diffusion. So, and perhaps it could be mixed.
Yeah.
Ouais.
Great.
Je pense que je vais répondre en français, ça va être plus facile. Parce que c'est justement, c'est ce qu'on a trouvé pertinent avec les middle ground, c'est que c'est justement dans cet espace où les communautés créatives, c'est-à-dire les espaces où les projets de fabrication qui sont en train de développement, peuvent être rejoints par les institutions, c'est-à-dire par les upper ground. Et c'est justement dans cet espace où on peut faire les liens entre les deux parties, justement pour les aider à développer. On fait les liens entre ceux qui commencent et ceux qui aident à développer les initiatives pour aller.
Alors, pardonne-moi, mais en fait, l'intérêt des middle ground, c'est qu'on retrouve l'underground et l'upperground à l'intérieur du middle ground. Il ne faut pas oublier cette couche inférieure
Oui.
et qui est supposée, enfin, ce que nous dit les Canadiens notamment, moi j'ai écrit aussi un papier là-dessus, qui nous disent que c'est ça qui permettrait aux personnes, aux créatifs qui sont présents dans le middle ground de sortir du middle ground et de s'institutionnaliser, de se développer, etc. Mais il y a ce lien à faire entre le le middle et puis le
Juste apporter juste peut-être un commentaire sur la compréhension et le positionnement par rapport à ce modèle dans le projet. Le projet, il vise à renforcer les capacités des espaces collaboratifs à soutenir des projets underground, c'est-à-dire à mettre à disposition des machines, des outils, des technologies, des connaissances, compétences, pour que cette justement couche qui n'a pas forcément accès à ces moyens, à ces connaissances, etc. Voilà, et c'est comme ça qu'ils jouent. Donc les middle ground, ce sont ces plateformes-là, les Fab Labs, les Makerspace, etc., qui vont faire le lien justement entre la stratégie globale, européenne, nationale, etc., et puis les créatifs, donc notamment par les financements européens, ils vont renforcer la technologie. Donc c'est dans cette logique qu'il y a les espaces qu'on appelle les urban factories, il y a leur capacité et puis il y a les utilisateurs qui seront ces collectifs Mais en tout cas, c'est comme ça qu'on. Mais sur le commentaire de mixer avec la transition multi, c'est très intéressant de faire un mix pour à la fois faire le diagnostic, mais aussi la trajectoire d'évolution de ces espaces.
De transition.
Ouais. Merci. Tu veux rajouter quelque chose, Laurent?
Si tu veux rajouter sur une dernière.
Oui.
My questions, it's more comment for the stage. In fact, the big question is what you want to scale up. So it's not only the factory and the middle ground or what you want. It's about European DAOs and the value beyond European DAOs. And in fact, we want to scale up some spaces, manufacture, etc., to reduce the impact of global manufacturing. So it's quite a paradox. We want to upgrade something to reduce something. So we need to think also about that because maybe it's not necessary to replicate the Rhodes factory, but maybe the scale up, it's about the value beyond the Rhodes factory and disseminate the value in another places, in another manufacturer, etc. To have another strategy to produce objects in the cities and in the plants. So, and this is the sense behind the project.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Well, maybe I can comment on that. I think also scaling up in that context would actually be looking into software and open source software, how this distributes, right? I think there are very successful open source software projects where we would argue they scaled up, but not necessarily have many nodes to be produced. Also here, it's especially if we talk about digital designs and able to share, they could scale up individually in each regional or local context and therefore have a scale, but not necessarily in one manufacturing environment, right? I think this is another definition we can definitely encounter. And the second thing is, at what point, maybe I missed it because my French is a bit rusty. At what point would you also argue there is the factor of the nature of the specific physical artifact you want to produce? At what point scaling up makes sense or not? Like, you know, from very, very, you know, low tech, individualized size or number of batch one to versus very complex, you know, smartphone-like things. I guess there are different strategies where if we argue New European dollars is also a bit towards a sustainability model in production, the question is at what range does it make sense, right? Would there be an argument to say, you know, some things like toilet paper, probably we don't want them made locally, it doesn't make sense economically and ecologically. But with other products, it makes much more sense. Like, is the lever of or the factor of the kind of product we talk about, is that at some point in the middle reflected there? I guess there is a multi-dimensional space where you would say, you know, the nature of your
the physical layer with the machines, but not the output, not the product. It was more about the space, the machine, the technology. So this dimension we didn't really go. Yeah, maybe it could be.
I guess there are some natural boundaries, right?
Yeah.
So if you have a physical space with machines, your output and complexity what can reach is limited, right? So it already limits the kind of solution space. But then in between, even we would argue it would make sense.
I think in the project we have this debate, but we can continue after we know about the project. The project was not really. Okay, sorry, we are running out of time. Maybe we will discuss this later. I will invite Robert.
Okay, it's already
Now
here.
it's you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good.
Yeah.
Last one was you.
Yeah, I can touch the screen. It's not like this one. This one I can touch. Okay. Okay, so my topic is a bit different. I'm Robert Ried, TU Berlin. And yeah, so we coordinate the project, but I'm actually showing something that is not from the LAUS project, but it's important because open source hardware is what we want to unpack in this presentation. And there's a background story to this because open source hardware enables manufacturing to a large extent also in the design phase. And it's also an innovation phenomenon. And it's about digital transformation in industry that we researched before the LAUS project, where we found this was not, whatever we were researching in industry there with small, medium enterprises was not reflected in research protocols, meaning academic research, what we're doing with students and so on also. And also in terms of the link to circularity of the session, it's hard to make an endpoint at this point or make any reflection also of business models and scaling, but there is also in fact, the connection, because with open source hardware, we have also to ask ourselves, how can we develop it? How can we scale it into market from the idea to the market? Yeah. And so this starts often in research. And this is why we're looking into this today. We're looking at open source hardware as a term for tangible artifact. Wow, this is really good. Yeah, it is better. It's basically about machines or physical things whose design has been released to the public in such a way that anyone can make, modify, distribute, and use those things. That's the commonly agreed definition of open source hardware for those of you who don't know it. So that enables, so to make the link with circularity now, as I promised, to remix, remake, remanufacture, redistribute, resell, study and learn about
products. We've heard a lot about fabrication. We have not heard so much about products. And that's very important for scale up, in my view. Okay, I think you will agree with me. Now, there is a specific thing about if we want to think about research. And so we made in the Research Data Alliance an interest group to define what is research hardware. So from a data perspective, we don't even have to call this open because data managers today, everything is open access. Yeah? So research hardware is a physical object developed as part of or for a research process is how we defined it in a subgroup with experts in the field, data manager and open source hardware scientists, researchers. And so it's either comes out of a research process that develops hardware, so let's say an innovation project like Cloud Factories, or it is used in a research project, let's say like a project that uses a pipette for a biological experiment. Yeah? Okay. So, how did this come about? It started with Linux, then we had the Arduino, then we had some licenses. CERN made a repository. The Gathering of Open Science Hardware was formed in Cambridge, and eventually UNESCO adopted open source hardware as open scientific knowledge. That is how this came about. Yeah, in brief. So now we talk about open scientific knowledge and open hardware as part of it. Voila. No. Not for you. Because, and now this is where the whole problem starts. We don't even have transfer paths of hardware from university into the market. Yeah, so open source hardware is not a reality that starts at the university and that builds up a structured path of innovation. Yeah, we have also what I call lack of research protocols. We don't even know how to develop hardware in a university and make that in a co-design way. Don't have training in scientific teaching for open source hardware development. It's the subject of my PhD thesis that I made, and not very clear how this should evolve so quickly. And we have a lack of characterizations, even of activities. What are we talking about in each case when someone is making a project in academia or closer to the market, closer in the transfer stage? What do we call it? What do we coin it? How do we characterize it? We don't even have names for these projects. So this is a lot of problems. Okay, let's tackle some research questions here, and then maybe we tackle more problems in the future here. So why do researchers and other stakeholders use open source hardware in academia? First of all, the motivational aspect. Whenever we have innovation, we have to ask about the motivation. What documentation and collaboration practices for open source hardware can be found in academia? Yeah? And also which benefit impact is created by open source hardware in academia? Let's keep this in mind. We've got a research question defined for this work. Whoa. So what's the easiest? I mean, this is grounded research. We make 15 phone calls on Zoom for an hour and talk to the most relevant people in the field. That's what we did. We had some very good criteria, I believe, and we found very good project. From even Global South, we didn't just want to have a Western perspective, from different fields, from farming robots to oxygen concentrators, since it was shortly after COVID, and this is already 2 years ago, we made this. Whoa, more like 3 years. Anyway, so a lot of different impressions, trying to get also a worldwide perspective, trying to talk to smaller, bigger projects. Some of them were quite large, actually, and some of them were quite small. Large meaning, for example, White Rabbit in CERN was a pretty large project, whereas the plastic scanner in TU was pretty small. Yeah? Meaning we had entire teams working on something and one person. So we did come up with some data there, naturally, talking about these things with people in a semi-structured way along these talking lines. Who, by, for, why, what, how much, and how did you actually do it? We asked them these things with some defined questions, and then we coded all of this and transcripted it and coded it. Yeah, this was still before AI, I would say. when we transcripted it, we used AI, but it was before we could really use AI in coding. I think today, maybe we can still use some to write this, make some more processing of the data. So here you see our code. So this is like the coding book. We defined everything very meticulously. I don't go so much into the data analysis, but it was a bit like a sequential process. So we had the 5 categories, and within that, then we detected things and we detected all these, so what you saw on the left here, and defined them for ourselves. So the subcodes. So those familiar with coding, it's a thematic analysis in a sequential way. So just to kind of not just talk too much, but maybe ask a little bit, if you think about all these motivations here, in fact, number 2 is ideology, what we found. Anyone here in the room who could think of what would be the most prominent motivation of people doing open source hardware in academia? I mean,
Knowledge sharing.
Yeah, that would be very sensible. In fact, impact. Surprise for us too. Problem solving, knowledge some scientific motivation. Okay, so the artifacts. So we looked at the documentation, the process, and so on. So because this research was also motivated from other work we're doing at the same time with Jean-François Bourget and Grenoble. We looked at, we actually find from interviews a lot of evidence about artifacts. And just to say, one thing that's not so clear is why all these artifacts evolve. What we find is we have open hardware projects, but we cannot really pinpoint as to what people would do to support what we call the freedoms of open source hardware. You see them here. So why are people doing open source hardware? They want to enable people to study, modify, make, distribute. I read this definition to you. And also ideally use and dispose the hardware or repair the hardware. So this is a bit going beyond the definition of the OSHWA. In fact, it allowed us a bit to put in perspective why different, for what, let's say, purpose different people actually shared artifacts. So this was more natural talking points with people. And this helps us to ask ourselves again a little bit about the means and the ways on how to find actually goals on why you would want to share open hardware, because it's not necessary to share all of this. It's necessary to find the right goals and share the right artifacts. So it's very important to consider this. Second, for the second research question, so we kind of then took this information and made a simple graph. You don't see this here now, but it's like TRL levels. There's the other one. Voila. So we see here the TRL, the technology readiness rising, and you see here the collaboration readiness, which we run, and it's a bit of a, I would say, not so multifactorial approach. It's more a common sense approach. But so you can do it like in a 2x2 matrix or something like that. But so the idea is here. You see here also the depth of the projects that we have on the sample. It's university, higher learning, NGOs, business. So you see like where they come from. It's for distributed manufacturing, so close to large factories, to make the link here again. Appropriate technology, so this is more for Global South, or open educational, so purely academic resources. Some of this actually quite sophisticated, will be more for academics also. And we just mapped this, okay? So just keep this in mind. You don't have to now observe every project or something. But just to say, we then went a step further and we tried to ask ourselves from the data, because this doesn't make sense without the data behind it. It's not really useful to make a 2x2 matrix like Americans and then claim, oh, this is the cutoff point, and then we're talking about real innovation. No. We ask ourselves, why are some people here? Why are some people there? That's I think what we need to do. And what we find is some people are here at the beginning quite naturally, but because we talk, of course, to very successful projects here, we talk to people who have really experience in the field, and come from different backgrounds. So we find a lot of projects that are already quite developed. We find, in fact, projects that have already developed startups. This is from Oxford University, AudioMods. They've already sold several generations of this. We find quite sophisticated projects. Question is, of course, what Enrico said, how do we get there? And just to kind of find a simple answer to it, at this point, not in a linear fashion. Yeah, they actually go back and forth all the time, and some of them go here in a straight way, yeah, and then do it over and over again. Some of them also remain here because they are just early research, education, arts applications, so they're meant to be here. They're not meant to be there. And some of them actually are exactly that. Yeah, they are market innovation. They're commercialized. They are here. They're successful. They make a big impact. And some of them, strangely, are here. I got the numbering wrong here. So they're independent experimentation, and we used to call this a long time ago when we started doing research in open source hardware development, broadcasting. People just doing projects to tell people, I'm doing something, why don't you join in? But it's an individual experimentation. It's not something that, if we think about the scaling, it doesn't scale by being produced a lot or by being manufactured a lot. It scales by having other people to become part of making the same. Okay. So my conclusions, my insights here. In fact, I didn't introduce my co-authors for this work, who also did develop this work with me on the coding side, the coding book. But we came together with with Sasha Odom, also from Grenoble, and Giulietta Arancio from Alpine. And we kind of found in the end, after coding and everything, we found some patterns actually. Because first of all, in terms of the motivations, documentation practices, and the generated impact and so on, did share, by the way, all the interviews, open access and so on. And we are still putting the synthesis, let's say, together on collaboration practices. So I must say, we did investigate all of this, but the collaboration practices, we're still trying to dissect the data because it's just so much. But I think we are kind of solid on the other points. So we investigated that, and this is something where I'm just sitting on it right now. And then, so we coded all of it twice and so on. So it's more a question of how to make the learnings from that. Then, really a main finding and insight that we can say, however, apart from what I showed you right now, is that people are making the innovation. Yeah, so people are making this innovation. What does that mean? People outcomes, on the one hand, are a real benefit of open source hardware development. Yeah, this is just taking the frequencies and making it into a mind map. Yeah, this is actually quite interesting. So there's research, a benefit, like what you said, knowledge sharing and so on, but also people. Another thing that's interesting is, and if you think about that, that's actually what socio-technical systems hypothesis from software tells you. Yeah, and another thing is that people and processes are, in our view, undervalued in current open source hardware literature, because it's a clear outcome also. It's not just people benefiting from it by learning and so on, it's also a clear outcome. People are trained, people are learning how to become capable in their field and so on. A lot of doctoral students and so on, the interviews are mirrored with that. And then another thing is that innovation is reached in a way through interdisciplinary collaboration here. So what we find is that, and this is something I'm not sure, I haven't Googled it before today, but there is this idea of co-opetition, and we are wondering, in terms of open innovation, whether this could also be a type of collaboration from research to market, and that people should look at the organizational conflicts, of course, with this. If you come from research and you do something like this, but also to think about it, because if you want to normalize open science for hardware, then we should have this collaboration, yeah? But we should also eventually get into a competitive sphere in the market, yeah? So clearly there's a different type of organizational conflict here. Last but not least, in brackets, really, because of yesterday, the second keynote after the noon. So it's a radical innovation phenomenon. And yeah, so you've seen some new innovation paths that appear here that we framed, but we think that they are highly additive. Yeah. And this is, I would say, after what I've seen yesterday, instead of being subtractive. So we don't feel like it's about going to the market and making a competition against all the existing products or replacing them. It's actually about creating new segments, new markets, new products that are different from the existing products. And that could be fostered more from academia. Yeah, this is just a research project funding out. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So again, do you have? Yes. Yes, thank you for your presentation. I was wondering why you chose the TRL to put in the text, because it kind of shows an assumption that the process from collaboration to market is a result of TRL, while you could also imagine maybe the potential impact of it, or the,
Yeah.
I'm thinking about yesterday, the amount of capacities that you need or capacity
Yeah.
you need. So
Yeah, you could have three streams also. TRL is only one stream technology. So that's only one stream. You could have one stream of people and you could have one stream of process that's evolving. Yeah. TRL is easy to measure. In fact, even using a TRL scale, a standard TRL scale is a bit strange. You could question that too. Because we made also technology readiness for this field is a bit different. So we made our own scale before and published on this. The reason is because when we make research in the university, we always try to, if you think about this first diagram about that I showed in the definition part about research in hardware, hardware in research, and also hardware from research, we try to create hardware that is market ready from the idea to the market in research a lot when it comes to technology development. And that's why we chose this. But you are right. It's in fact, it's not to say you have to go from the left to the right. We're more trying to demonstrate that it's not like that. What you see in the middle is a cluster of projects that deliberately go another path. So maybe that would be a good way to
I'm just
show this better.
also, I'm not so familiar with the topic, but thinking about open innovation or open research, we're also talking a lot how it becomes available to more
Yes.
spread societal challenges. So then I'm thinking that we should sometimes step away maybe from TRL and
Yeah.
think a bit more about
Yeah.
what's afterwards, but I don't know well enough this is.
No, and I think you're right, because the innovation doesn't have to be market related, it could be also social, for example. And in open access, that's very important. And I think, yeah, you could have like also, instead of mapping something, you could have like a spider diagram looking at all these different things. Yeah, so I think these kind of rankings, you could take them also in different direction. Yes. Yes.
So many typologies.
Yes, that's the problem. Yeah, yeah. So a multi-level perspective would be very good.
Thank you.
In the summary, you say people make innovation as a finding, right?
Yes.
Did you check out whether the success of whatever that means for a project, an open project, what constituted the group of people or inventors who actually worked within the group? Because I'm imagining,
Yeah.
like most very successful open hardware project that turns into a market ready product or is commercially usually involves then a entrepreneur, like a guy, not the tech
Team composition is very important.
So because here we usually find makers and researchers, they